Korea, the Forgotten War. In the rugged, frozen mountains around the Chosin Reservoir, the 1st Marine Division faces a desperate battle for survival. Today on Little Wars TV, we refight that first stunning week of the Chinese surprise attack.
How did the UN forces fail to detect that Chinese buildup? Is the fault entirely MacArthur's? After exploring the history, we'll unleash our Chinese players on the tabletop to develop a new strategy to destroy the 1st Marine Division. Can they pull it off, or will the Leathernecks fight their way out?
The Forgotten War gets its due right now on Little Wars TV.
I want to thank you all for visiting the National Museum of the Marine Corps. My name is Dave Vickers, and I'm the Deputy Director here at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. There's a number of reasons why this particular battle is so resonant with Marines. First of all, we call it one of our touchstone battles, a battle that really embodies a lot of who we are as Marines. Who we are, how we think, and more importantly, who we are in here, in our hearts. These particular Marines during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir fought in the coldest temperatures that Marines have ever fought in. There were, for example, daytime recorded temperatures of 20 degrees below zero. That's without the wind chill. And when I take you down the galleries and I show you what these Marines were actually wearing, the weather was just as much an enemy as the North Koreans and the Chinese that they were fighting. Many of them that made it out had lost fingers and toes to frostbite. Some of them actually froze to death. And I think the other reason why this is such a iconic battle for Marines is no one gave the 1st Marine Division a chance of making it out. They're known as the chosen few.
Yeah, you guessed it. Korea. Korea in December 1950. Looks cold, don't it? Colder than the heart of a comic. Well, maybe that's exaggerating. It's only 17 below.
To kind of understand how the Marines got at Chosin Reservoir, you have to really go back to earlier in the year. After World War II, Korea had been split into basically two countries on the Korean peninsula. Perhaps thinking that the United States and the UN wouldn't really care if the North Koreans attacked down into South Korea. That's exactly what happened in the summer of 1950. And the South Koreans were getting routed to the point where there was only a small part of Korea called the Pusan Perimeter that the UN forces were called into to try to hold on to the rest of that peninsula. They did, and at that point, General MacArthur, who's very well known from World War II, is also now in charge of UN forces there. He makes a daring, bold move that instead of trying to fight the Pusan Perimeter and enlarge it and push them back in, he's going to do a daring amphibious assault and go all the way around the peninsula over to the west side and land at a port called Incheon. The same Marines that are Chosin Reservoir a lot of them are the same ones that are going to land at Incheon. It's a brilliant strategic move. It literally cuts the supply lines for the North Koreans that have come down into the peninsula. It sets off a panic among the communist North Koreans, and they're getting routed. General MacArthur doesn't want to stop at just kicking their butts back into North Korea. He wants to keep going. And this is actually going to be a rub spot with him and Truman about who's really calling the shots over there, but that's a whole nother story. But MacArthur orders the UN forces to continue to attack north up to the Chinese border. He wants to completely wipe out the North Koreans. And that's what really sets the stage for what's going to happen. Korea is extremely mountainous, and they didn't have a road network back then. So really there is only one main road. And that one main road is going to become very, very important during this battle. So the Marines, as they're pushing north, and now we're talking middle to late November of 1950. They're pushing up by what is the Chosin Reservoir, and that's actually a misnamed name for it. It's actually a bastardization of some Japanese maps, and they ended up calling it Chosin. So the Marines start having contact with units that are wearing Chinese uniforms. Now, Mao, who's up in China, who's leading the communists, Mao sends a warning down to the UN forces, stay away from the Yalu River, which is the border between Korea and China. MacArthur doesn't take it seriously, thinks that, no, there's no way the Chinese are going to come into this. We'll kick their butts. I think he had a very cavalier attitude. I mean, after all, he had just pulled off the most incredible amphibious landing that's still studied here in our schools in the Marine Corps as an absolute masterpiece of amphibious assaults. So he's a little full of himself, I mean, and he has no reason to think that they can't continue up to the Chinese border because that's what they were doing, and almost unopposed by that time. And I think there was also a failure by intelligence to realize just how many Chinese had come down across the border. And by the time they started putting all those small pieces together and realizing the trap had been set, they were already surrounded. And the Chinese now, their strategic goal is to cut off that road, isolate the 1st Marine Division, and then destroy it in detail, one position after the other. And during the battle, they're getting hit all the way north from where the reservoir is, all the way down that one road south, because that's what they were all trying to do, was push up that one road. And they're being hit all over. So these Marines in these different positions really didn't have any reinforcements that they could count on. It was them. There was no cavalry coming over the hill. And this is where the battle really begins, where the Marines are trying to literally save their lives and get out of there.
And that's precisely where our war game begins, on the night of November 27th, 1950, with the start of the Chinese attack. We'll represent the entire reservoir, ringed by rugged mountains. In our war game, one base of figures represents about one company of troops.
As you can see, we've set up our war game inside the main lobby of the National Museum of the United States Marine Corps, outside Quantico, Virginia. If you haven't visited the museum before, it's a top-notch facility with world-class exhibits.
I'm Gwen Adams, and I'm the Public Affairs Director here at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. I'm also a retired Marine, so it's the perfect job for me. The National Museum of the Marine Corps is more than just a military museum. It is U.S. and world history as seen through the eyes of the Marines. So you're going to see a little bit of everything coming to the museum. You don't have to have a military affiliation. You don't have to be a history buff. It's just all the things that you're going to see that remind you what a great nation we live in and give you a respect for the men and women that serve this country. And there's always something new to see. I've been here almost 15 years, and I see something new every time I walk through the galleries, or I meet someone interesting every time I go through the galleries.
We'll be back with David and Gwen in a few weeks to see some of their favorite artifacts. There's so much to see here, including a large area dedicated not just to the Korean War, but to the Chosin Reservoir specifically. It's an immersive, powerful display you won't want to miss.
Tom, I think it's time we get our very own immersive display, our Chosin Wargame. I'm helping advise today's Chinese players, including my son Justin, and 3 of our longtime Little Wars TV patrons, Charlie, Greg, and Josh. The Chinese are allowed to attack from these 3 initial entry points on the table. As our scenario progresses, additional Chinese divisions arrive randomly from any of these zones. Historically, the PLA communication and coordination was limited once the battle got underway, which is why we're making our players roll randomly for where the reinforcements arrive. But we are allowing them to pick their initial entry points, giving the attackers a bit of flexibility to craft a new plan. Our Chinese players enjoy overwhelming numerical superiority, high morale, and the ability in the rules to conduct deadly night attacks, but their force is almost exclusively infantry with small arms.
Weapons are an important factor in war, but not the decisive one. It is man and not materials that counts.
The Chinese objective is to encircle and eliminate at least one Marine regiment before they can escape south. All roads lead back to an American fire base at Hagaru-ri. And if the Chinese can manage to capture this town and its airfield, that would represent a major PLA victory today.
Opposing the Chinese attack are roughly 40,000 United Nations troops strung out around the reservoir. Chosin is often considered a Marine Corps battle, but the eastern side of the reservoir was largely defended by a regimental combat team of the United States Army.
I think maybe the Army hasn't got a fair shot in this. Some historians say that the Army was very timid and did not have this fighting spirit that the Marines had. When RCT 31 is on the east side of the Chosin Reservoir, they get hit hard. I don't know how else to put it, but really slaughtered. A lot of the soldiers kept seeing their Army trucks down on the road and kept trying to run down to the trucks because they're like, we got to get the hell out of here and go. Some historians have faulted them for that hey, if they had stayed and fought on those ridge lines, that it wouldn't have been the disaster that it was. A lot of the soldiers that actually made it, the way they made it is they escaped by going across the ice on the reservoir itself over to the western side where the Marines were. So, and in fairness to them too, they were the farthest north on the east side. They had no way of getting reinforcements. Everybody was getting hit along that road. So I think maybe they get kind of a bum rap. When you look at the Chinese units that were attacking them, they were getting overrun. There was just no other way to put it.
I'll do my best to advise our UN players in today's war game.
So my name is Sebastian Bay. I was the commander of 1st Mardiv.
I'm Ian Brown. I was commander of 5th Marines and 7th Marines.
I'm Aaron Brown. I'm Ian Brown's son, and I play Task Force Faith.
They begin the game spread out around the reservoir. While heavily outnumbered, they can call upon powerful airstrikes, heavy artillery fire, and even a handful of Pershing tanks. But their initial deployment is historical, and we are not allowing them to adjust it.
The Chinese have more flexibility, and this is a critical strategic decision facing the attackers right out of the gate. Should the Chinese hit the UN from as many angles as possible, as they did historically, or should they focus their attack on a narrower front to achieve a decisive breakthrough? Our Chinese players elect to split the difference, concentrating 2 divisions against the Marines and sending 1 division to tie down the US Army on the other side of the reservoir. For the record, I want to say that I suggested a more concentrated approach, but our tabletop commanders felt leaving the Army unengaged would allow the Americans too much freedom to redeploy. They want to bog down all the UN forces in early firefights. At least, that's the plan the Chinese aim to test today.
One important scenario restriction gives the Chinese a major boost in the first turn. Our scenario does not allow the leading American elements to retreat right away. Historically, MacArthur's standing orders at the start of the battle were for all troops to advance north. So this explains why, in our game, the UN forces cannot automatically pull back right away.
And the Chinese are using the opening turn to advance rapidly across a broad front. They're using a homebrew set of rules called Frozen Chosin, specifically designed for the Chosin Reservoir. Nighttime actions were very important for the Chinese in this engagement, so our game is written to give the UN forces a lot of options during the daylight, but at night, the initiative flips to the Chinese. In addition to moving their troops, each player has a menu of available daily operations and assets. As you can see, the Chinese menu includes infiltration, roadblocks, and surprise attacks.
People of the world, unite and defeat the U.S. aggressors and all their running dogs.
The American menu includes powerful airstrikes and coordinated artillery support. This is how we're representing the unique fighting style and assets of the opposing armies. And it doesn't take long for corsairs to appear in the sky above Chosin, hammering the first wave of Chinese infantry west of the reservoir. It's clear that the Chinese are making their main effort on this side of the lake, and the American players aren't shy about calling in every available off-board asset they have. Sebastian is the overall commander at Hagaru-ri, which means it's his responsibility to decide how to allocate American fire support. And on the first day of the operation, he's sending it all to help the U.S. Marines.
How typical. The U.S. Army is left out to dry yet again. But Ian's son, Aaron, commanding the Regimental Combat Team 31, doesn't seem worried. He concentrates his troops above Hudong-ni and orders them to dig in and receive the initial Chinese attack. With both sides focusing on the other side of the lake, the U.S. Army doesn't seem to be under the same kind of pressure it was historically.
But the pressure against the Marines is intensifying. As we advance through day 2 of the operation, Sebastian is trying to set up a fighting withdrawal. It won't be easy. Chinese regiments are swarming over the hills and pressuring his frontline outposts from all angles.
On the eastern side of the lake, the soldiers of Regimental Combat Team 31 wake up to a rude surprise on day 2. A Chinese regiment has entered the table south of their dug-in position, threatening to cut the road south of Hagaru-ri. But, remarkably, Aaron doesn't blink at this danger. Our young, brash American commander decides he'll hold his position and let the Chinese come to him. And under the cover of darkness on day 2, they do just that. Horns blaring, trumpets sounding, an entire Chinese division crashes down on the U.S. Army positions. Against the odds, the U.S. troops hold the line, but with frightful losses on both sides.
As day 3 of the operation dawns, Sebastian decides to send a small relief column to help Aaron's Regimental Combat Team 31 break out of their situation. Multiple Corsair strikes are called in to weaken the Chinese envelopment, wiping most of a PLA regiment off the map. But safe in his command post at Hagaru-ri, Sebastian is about to face a new threat. Randomized Chinese reinforcements roll and appear from the southwest. The danger is obvious. This new Chinese regiment could attack Hagaru-ri itself or move to cut off the Marines in the mountain passes.
It's not all good news for the Chinese, though. They've already suffered massive casualties in the opening 2 days of the operation, and Ian's Marine regiments are conducting a very skillful fighting withdrawal south.
Skillful, but slow. Rather than rush south and risk being ambushed or hit in the rear, Ian's withdrawal is methodical, hopping from firebase to firebase. But soon the Marines are going to have to change their tactics. No air operations today. All range fire limited to 4 inches or less. All commands lose 1 operations dice.
Every turn, a random event card is revealed, and on day 4, poor weather grounds all U.S. airstrikes. This alone would be devastating news, but it's compounded by the randomized arrival of another Chinese regiment. And guess where they roll to arrive?
It's a dream scenario for the Chinese. They couldn't have asked for a better entry point. It's now clear to all players that the climax of the battle is near. The race for the Toktong Pass is on. With blizzard-like conditions and blinding snow, both the Marines and the Chinese reserves race to see who can secure the mountain pass first.
With a moment of crisis ramping up on the tabletop, a steady stream of museum guests began to grow as more onlookers and entire families found themselves drawn into the drama. This really was a highlight of being able to play the Chosin Reservoir in the main lobby of the National Museum of the Marine Corps. We all had a blast interacting with the visitors and sharing our love of historical miniature wargaming.
I think we may have made a few converts at this game, and I'd say 90% of the folks we met had never heard of miniature wargaming before.
As always, the Chinese own the night, and on the night of the 4th day, our Chinese players mount a major offensive on the eastern side of the reservoir. With Regimental Combat Team 31 stubbornly sheltering in frozen foxholes, Josh argues that one Herculean effort could be enough to finish them off. The eerie blast of trumpets sounds over the snowy hills. The waves of Chinese troops press in for the coup de grace.
Despise your enemy strategically, but take him seriously tactically.
Once again, the U.S. Army stands tall and takes the blow. Their artillery is gone, their Pershing Tank Company annihilated, and 2/3 of Regimental Combat Team 31 is dead or wounded. As night turns to day, Sebastian consults with his young Army subordinate to formulate an escape plan. Yesterday, Sebastian made the painful decision to abort his relief effort, turning his armored column around to deal with the massing Chinese waves west of Hagaru-ri. The Army, it seems, will have to fight its way out on its own.
Across the reservoir, the roar of machine guns and artillery can be heard. The battle for the Toktong Pass is on. Using a nighttime infiltration move, the Chinese win the race to cut off the Marine column. This is one of the unique special abilities available to the Chinese side, reflecting their emphasis on nighttime operations. In today's war game rules, the opposing sides alternate conducting operations. Each player chooses to order one of his on-table regiments to move and fight, or players can choose to conduct one operation from their available menu of options. The operations are planned at the start of each day, which requires all players to think carefully about what operations they will want to take during the course of the day. And as you can see on the operations menu, a die roll is still required, so success is not guaranteed.
By this point in the game, after 4 days of heavy fighting, our UN players are wondering when relief might arrive from off-table. Historically, a hasty multinational relief column dubbed Task Force Drysdale fought its way through Chinese forces to reach Hagaru-ri. It was one of the most famous moments of the historical operation. Very little of Drysdale's ad hoc force, which included British commandos, made its way all the way through the Chinese lines.
But in our game, Drysdale has not yet appeared. His arrival can be influenced by event cards. One earlier card Tom drew delayed the relief column until December 2nd, while another card we flipped over has already started removing units from Drysdale's off-table force.
The UN forces need him to show up, as the situation is dire when dawn breaks on day 5. After each side plans new operations, the UN forces go first, and Ian's 7th Marine Regiment launches a furious counterattack in the mountains.
I think you split between these two.
Yeah, I'll do 3 and 2. I'll do 3 on the closest one. 6. 2. He's dead.
With their superior firepower, it's the Marines who get the better of the action, pushing the PLA troops off the road and opening a narrow corridor to Hagaru-ri.
And Sebastian is looking to widen that corridor. He calls in punishing U.S. airstrikes, pounding the exposed Chinese regiments swarming toward the mountain pass. The long, snaking Marine column now has a clear road to escape.
The heroes of Regimental Combat Team 31 have no such hope. The Army soldiers are utterly spent, totally isolated, and a long way from safety. Aaron has just one avenue left. He must cross the frozen ice of the Chosin Reservoir and make a desperate dash southwest. Pursued by the Chinese and under heavy fire, most of the soldiers are killed or captured. Just 2 companies make it across the lake, and they are still deep behind Chinese lines.
In waking a tiger, use a long stick.
Back at Hagaru-ri, leading elements of Ian's Marine column filter into the base. They are exhausted from the fighting withdrawal, but have made it to relative safety.
Well, some have made it. The 5th Marines are in good shape, but the 7th Marine Regiment, the formation that had to battle through the Toktong Pass, is badly mauled. Just 1/3 of the men have survived.
Chinese losses are staggering after 5 days, but are not part of our victory conditions. Remember, Mao and his leading generals were quite prepared to spend tens of thousands of lives at Chosin. The historical Chinese objective was the encirclement and elimination of at least 1 or more Marine regiments. And in this, our Chinese players have just barely failed.
Our Chinese players did manage to destroy Regimental Combat Team 31, but the real prize was Hagaru-ri, or the destruction of the Marines. With Task Force Drysdale finally appearing on the 5th day of the operation, the Allied position at Hagaru-ri is quite strong. Strong enough to begin their fighting withdrawal back down Hellfire Valley to the south. In retrospect, I think our UN players handled a difficult decision quite well. Aaron's stubborn defense of Regimental Combat Team 31's area may have led to their ultimate destruction, but he did distract the Chinese from their primary goal.
And honestly, I think it'd be hard to criticize our Chinese players either. Remember, the Chinese didn't have the ability to coordinate their reinforcements. All reserves entered from a random point, which made it very, very hard to react and evolve their initial plan. And that's how we represented a historical challenge the Chinese commanders faced in 1950.
The rules we used for today's game are a set we developed in the club specifically to play this unique battle at a core level scale. If you're a patron of Little Wars TV, first, thank you. Secondly, you can now find the beta version of the Frozen Chosin Reservoir scenario on the Patreon site.
Let us know what you think of the rules, and we'll see if it goes anywhere. We also want to thank the National Museum of the Marine Corps and their entire staff for the hospitality. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to take you inside more of the galleries.
Until then, happy Memorial Day to all of our U.S. viewers. Memorial Day honors men and women who died serving in the American Armed Forces. Whether they fought in the frozen mountains of Korea, the jungles of Guadalcanal, or the fields of Antietam, please find a minute of your day to give those heroes a moment of reflection. They've earned it.